informed decision. I don't pretend to have an opinion because I don't live there and I don't know what matters or doesn't matter to you. I don't know what your needs are, et cetera. But I can give you hopefully some information that's relatively easy to understand considering the complexity of the topic and maybe fast forward you through several months of all of the analysis that I did to get you started. So with that, uh, who am I? Retired technology executive, Caledonia resident, now trustee. Successfully resisted a data center here in Caledonia, which I thought was a terrible idea, both location-wise and financially. I've turned into an upper Midwest data center gadfly, and I'm a big TID critic, and some of that has to do with the design of them, and some of that has to do with the execution of them, and I'll get into that. I am also an animal lover and animal rescuer. Um, those two beautiful little animals in the picture there are both rescued horses in my backyard. Um, so I need you to understand this before proceeding. It's really, really important. It sounds really simple at the start, but understanding the connection here is helpful. Your tax bill, you all know what that is. You get them in the mail and grumble and ask why your taxes keep going up. And the tax levy, though, is all the tax bills together. And residents always think in terms of tax bill. City government always thinks in terms of tax levy. And residents like their bills to drop, and city government likes their levy to increase. And guess what? Those two things are at odds. Thus, the image of the tug of war. So just remember that constant struggle between those two things, tax bills dropping and tax levy increasing. Hard to do both of those at the same time. Um, where I headed after a couple months worth of digging initially into this topic was what I now refer to as the root of all of our problems. And I'll lead with, I think the state law was well intentioned, but I think it's poorly executed or poorly designed. The goal of the legislation a long, long time ago was to constrain local government overspending. They didn't want just whimsical increases in the tax levy that resulted in greater tax bills because local officials refused to make tough decisions. But in order to constrain that overspending, the state chose a proxy for how to determine whether a community needed more tax levy. So there's it's a little bit micromanagey, but they wanted to say if we use this calculation of construction, then we can use that as a reasonable proxy for how much, let alone if you need to raise the levy. So if you aren't building anything in your community, you can't raise the levy even by a dime. If you are building, then you must need to raise your levy. You've got new services, you need more police and firefighters and so on. So go ahead to a limit. If you want to increase your levy and you don't have the construction to prove that you need it, then you have to go to referendum. You know what? That's it. So you have two options. You get new construction to justify a levy increase, or you go to referendum. And politicians don't like going to referendum because you pesky little citizens might say no. But the real underlying root problem here is there's no inflation adjustment allowed in the calculation. There's no 2/3 of this consumer price index or full price consumer price index, or there's no just maybe even static 1.5% increase. There's nothing. It's zero from year to year. And you all know from your personal budgets that inflation hits many of the line items in your budget every year, whether it's groceries or car insurance or whatever. And it's tough to manage a budget. In fairness to your local officials, it's tough to manage a budget if you can't increase the levy. You could maybe get by for a few years and cut some expenses that should have been cut long ago, but eventually that game runs dry. And I will remind everyone, and I do think this is really relevant, we just came out of a period where inflation was a little red hot. And I think that created some additional pressures on local officials that maybe added fuel to the fire that I'm about to describe. So the unintended consequence, or maybe the poorly executed part of this, is if you tell local officials they have one variable to solve for, net new construction, then they're going to get desperate for new construction and they're going to start chasing development. They're going to call developers, hey, could you come build here? They're going to do whatever they can to get those developers to build in their backyard instead of the backyard of the uh, community down the road. And we all know supply and demand. So we just shot up demand. And the supply for construction comes in a couple forms. It comes in just the pure labor of building, but it also comes in terms of capital. If there's only so much money to go around, investment capital, and if you only have a finite amount and you just jacked up your demand by supercharging local governments to start chasing development, then economics 101 will tell you that price has to rise. But what is price in this context? It's an interesting question, and you will start to see the dots connect shortly. So we're gonna talk about price in a second, but I need to introduce the topic of tax increment financing. And just as a background, you will hear the acronym TID and TIF, and they're synonymous. People use them interchangeably. If you want to really split a hair, the TID is the tax increment district, which is the description of the geographic boundary and the whole project itself. And TIF is a reference to the financing part of the money part. But if you hear them, they are the same thing. Don't think somebody's trying to be really tricky. They're used interchangeably. You will see this graph all the time where people talk about TIDs or TIFs, and straight from the Wisconsin. Sorry.
That's an easy way to come in. Sure.
All right, thank you. Straight from the Wisconsin DOR manual, TIF is a financing option that allows a municipality to fund infrastructure and other improvements through property tax revenue on newly developed property. Sounds super benign, right? But let's dive in. I've annotated that slide with a list of or an order of things and a description of each part of the graphic that help identify what they are. So step one, over on the bottom left, freeze the taxes paid to each authority. So let's say you have an empty property that's generating $100 a year in taxes because it's a farm field. Well, that $100 is spread across those four taxing authorities: county, school, technical college, and municipality. When you start to TID, you snap the line and say, okay, $100 a year, we're going to keep giving that to those four. But anything we build on top of that $100 is going to go into this little magic TID thing, and magic's going to happen. So number two, build, increase property value. That's what happens in that triangle that says value increment of active TID. And just so you can be one of the cool kids and speak the language, increment just means the added tax revenue. But you'll sound really TID savvy if you use the word increment, but it just means the extra tax revenue produced. And then the bottom line, step three, wait 20 years. It's a little misleading. These are all 20 to 20 plus years long, and that's a really long time, and it's probably one of the bigger problems with these things. The amount of time it takes to actually get them closed and get to the value that is number four, which is, all right, we did all that building, we paid off all of the obligations of the TID, whether it was roads, whether it was water and sewer extension, whether it was blight remediation, whatever the expenses were that were part of that TID, that can take 20 years to get through. But once you do, then all of a sudden your county, school, technical college, and municipality jump up and down when it's closed, because now they're getting a boatload more money from the extra tax revenue that you've generated. The key here to making this a thing and potentially either a weapon or a tool, the TID lays claim to all four taxing authorities' increased revenue for that 20 years. And that's really the big difference here. So as you're building a new building, houses, apartment buildings, manufacturing facilities, whatever, that's generating a bunch of revenue. Normally, your community would get a third to half of that value, but because you put it inside this TID, and all of those taxing authorities said, yeah, we're in, we want to do this too, those other three taxing authorities are giving you that tax increase for that 20-year period. So you get, bottom line, you get a lot more money to play with than if you were just doing this by yourselves and not with the approval of those other guys willing to give up their revenue over that 20-year period. And as I said, the newly generated tax revenue during that timeline of 20 years, that revenue stays inside the TID to pay for TID expenses. It's not allowed to come out and pay for a raise for your city council, for example. It's got to stay in and pay for water and sewer and other things, benign and not so benign, that are expenses inside that TID. So that's sort of as easy as it gets in terms of a description. Obviously gets a lot more complicated and nerdy, but that should do the trick. Hopefully that helps at least provide some understanding of the mechanics. So back to the question, what is price in this context? Well, here's where we start to get the fun stuff. Tax increment financing creates a way to pay developers via tax reimbursement. So you got all this extra money from all four of those taxing authorities, and you get to say to developers, hey, we want to make this worth your while. And if you build here, we'll give you a little tax reimbursement to make it worth your while, and or to help pay for things that are unique to the property that prevent you from making a lot of money. But without tax increment financing, you don't have this facility. So the tax increment financing, in my opinion, and this is sort of why that tax law or that levy increase law and TIFs come together, as they meet and create this, what you're about to see as the sort of problem. But when you jacked up supply or jacked up demand for development and you kept supply flat, price has to go up. So if price has to go up, this is what price becomes. Tax reimbursement becomes the price of development. And you do that through TIF. So here's another interesting little tidbit from the Wisconsin DOR TIF manual, and it's the picture in the background is important context. If you read that quote independently of the picture, you might start to raise an eyebrow and think, hey, wait a minute. TIF can alter the profit picture by shifting some of the development costs from the developer to the taxpayer. So what I want to impress with this picture is there are some situations where that sentence can be good and benign, and there's some cases where that sentence can be sinister. And in this case, this is an actual photograph of an abandoned school in my village that was subsequently torn down and with tax increment financing money, and the property was then set up to have some construction on top of it. I'll get more into that use case in a minute, but I just use that picture because that sentence starts to, at least for me, it started to raise an eyebrow. But going back to the original intention of a TID to take on things like blighted properties that nobody wants to touch, that's sort of where it makes sense. It's just what you'll see in the next slide is it's a very slippery slope. So step one on the slope, very palatable to pay for blight remediation. If a developer says, I can't touch that thing because I've got to spend the first $2 million tearing it down and cleaning up the property and maybe having some toxic waste removal on the property, whatever, those costs can kill a deal. And we all want a level playing field. We want developers to not have to lose money on a project because we have blight to remediate. So the city or the village gets something out of it. They offset the cost of the blight remediation with tax reimbursements, and the developer gets essentially to start from the clean property and build something and make a decent profit. To me, and I think to most normal human beings, assuming the definition of blight is well understood, I think that's a perfectly palatable use of tax reimbursements. But then we can get a little bit more borderline where you say, okay, in order to do the building that you want to do, you need some municipal infrastructure costs. You need maybe some traffic changes, road changes, road extensions, water and sewer extension, blah, blah, blah. And depending on the nature of the project and what it's producing and the nature of the infrastructure costs and the infrastructure types, you could take a room of 50 people and maybe split down the middle on whether they thought it was a reasonable thing to do. I've met people on both sides of that argument. I can make a case on both sides of that argument. Um, and it should generate a healthy discussion about what a municipality should reimburse. But then you get down to the slipperiest, maybe the bottom of the barrel or the bottom of the slope, where you're subsidizing profit margins. Developer says, I can't make money. I can't make enough money to attract investment capital from investors. So I can't even do the project unless you give me money and I can tell my investors that we're pretty much guaranteed a whatever 10, 12% return. And I think this is where we lose the public when your tax reimbursement is doing nothing but subsidizing someone's profit margin, not not preventing them from losing money, by the way, but preventing them from not making enough money to that's where I think you've got maybe a 90-10 split with the public to say, get out of here. We're not doing that. That's insane. But it happens and it happens quite a lot. So I pulled this also out of the Wisconsin DOR TIF manual and added the bolding myself because it really is what started raising my eyebrow. When considering a new development project, there is often considerable risk for the developer. As a reward for taking the risk, the developer must make a certain profit. They must make a certain profit. Even if the developer expects a profit, it may not be large enough to compensate. Therefore, the project may not be worthwhile. And this is all in the context of reasons why the Wisconsin Department of Revenue thinks you can, or is allowable reasons for doing tax reimbursements. And as I said on the previous slide, that's where the slope is really slippery. And I think you've got some people, a lot of people, a big percent of the people that would really consider that to be not the best use of municipal tax revenue. So just my snarky comments, exactly what profit margin are we guaranteeing here? Uh, junk bonds today, if everybody knows what a junk bond is, if you don't, the name implies that they're high risk and high reward, but they're making like 12 or 13%. And I've seen TIF projects that are guaranteeing 12%, 13% returns, annual returns on real estate development projects. So the fact that a municipal government is providing tax incentives to almost guarantee junk bond returns seems to me a tough sell to normal people, but that's maybe just me. TIDs also have some structural problems. The first one is a tax bill increase. There's a reference in the references page, and I'll share this document so everybody has it, but there's Wisconsin Legislative Council, a nonpartisan function of the Wisconsin legislature, wrote a position paper saying, hey, by the way, TIDs raise taxes on current residents. And it's because the new construction, if you remember that calculation from early in the discussion, the new construction in a TID is allowed to go into the levy increase calculation, but the TID revenue stays in the TID. So now you have a bigger levy, but you have the same number of taxpayers to spread it over. You don't have the new taxpayer yet because they're stuck in the TID for 20 years. And so the bigger number over the same number of taxpayers means every taxpayer's tax bill goes up. And if you remember that tug of war, the city wants to raise the levy. The residents want to lower their tax bills. Well, the city just got what they wanted in this case, but the taxpayers got the opposite of what they wanted. And I think that's some of the frustration with TIDs. In fairness, when a TID is really small, or when your aggregate number of TIDs is really small, then it's a rounding error and nobody notices. It's something for people to gripe about, like me, who have a philosophical distaste for that. But otherwise, when you have a big data center, and that's how this got exposed to me, when you have a big data center or you have 10 TIDs all going on producing construction at the same time, this can be a noticeable increase in your tax bills. They also have a tremendous, in my opinion, lack of oversight. They operate off books, sort of. I mean, they have their own set of books, but they're not part of the general fund. They're not part of, there's far less information published about them. You get maybe one update on the books per year. And sometimes even those can be versions that are multiple years old. They seem to have very, very limited oversight from the state. And there's the other four taxing or other three taxing authorities have to approve of the TID and changes to the TID. But I think now in all my looking, I've seen one taxing authority on one TID vote no on amending a TID and nobody ever voting no on approving it initially. It is a rubber stamp, and that should change, in my opinion. I don't think people understand the mechanics of them well enough to be voting on them, and the people should understand these impacts and these structural problems better. But it is what it is. There's a lack of oversight there. That's, I think, part of the problem. So I went and looked up a handful of TIDs, or I gathered a few that I put in my Hall of Shame. Um, and these are all in my Hall of Shame for different reasons. The big joke on this page is don't use TID 5 as a number for your TIDs. You should skip right over it because 4 out of these are TID 5, so there must be something unlucky about the number. But my own in Caledonia here, we bought a property for 1.4 million. We gave it away. We loaned 4 million to a developer. The developer skipped town. And then we paid another $3.5 million for the property. And then there's an even longer story beyond that. But ultimately, we're lots of millions in the hole on this. And we still have, this was the picture that I had on the other slide with the boarded up school. We now have a big open field, and it's lakefront property too, which ought to be really easy to not mess up, but we messed it up. We have an empty field that's been empty for years and nothing to show for this TID besides several $1 million in debt. A horrible, horrible, maybe even we have a special case for this one in the Hall of Shame. Mount Pleasant TID 5, that's Foxconn, and it's now probably more Microsoft than Foxconn, and we might be able to argue that Microsoft is bailing it out rather nicely for them. That could be true, but in terms of Foxconn as an initial proposed TID, that was clearly a disaster, and a disaster on a massive scale. It was going to send that community into bankruptcy and bail out by the state. It was so bad until Microsoft came along and bailed them out. I found this one on the right, St. Francis TID 5. They are actually double charging, using a loophole, I think, double charging residents for TID debt. And I could spend a lot of time getting into the weeds on this, but it's just yet another loophole that kind of skates under the radar. The taxpayers get charged for the debt. The TID pays the debt anyway because the TID is actually financially healthy. And then the debt that the residents thought they were paying for gets added to the general fund. But when the TID closes, they're going to be out that money, and the city's going to have a financial problem on their hands. It's an insidious use of TID. Racine TID 9, here's another example of one successfully paid off and otherwise boring, but it's being held open as a slush fund for other TIDs. And if you think of the TID as a mechanism to temporarily lay claim to all 4 taxing authorities' taxes, then the goal should be when it's successfully paid off, you close it and you let those other taxing authorities get the benefit of having waited 20 years. But the community can just kind of play games and keep this off-books stuff going and fund their other foibles, their other TIDs number 5, I guess. And then if you want to know you probably, because of your proximity to the place, you probably know all about the Port Washington TID, ironically also number five. And just watch my interview with Charlie Barons on that. I went into detail on why it was so bad. I've written articles on why it's so bad. Um, it is an unmitigated disaster. And I'll be really bold here, every single person that was involved in that decision should either give their money back if they were paid or resign in disgrace. Um, they will get no tax levy benefit without raising taxes on current residents. And 20 years from now, everybody gets a nice little tax um, rebate. But in the interim, they actually made worse the problem that they were trying to solve, which was increasing the levy and keeping pace with inflation. They made both those things worse. And I laugh, but it's really sad what they did. And they just wasted 1,600 acres worth of property that could have been used for more productive purposes. So anyway, that's my Hall of Shame. And I will add more as I continue my searching around the state for crazy problems. So what I decided to do, it is true I have not looked at all of your TIDs. I went and found one that was relatively simple, and I thought it might help if I just kind of walked you through how I see these and what I think is good, what I think is eyebrow raising, or downright um, bad. So just to take your eye to lines over on the left is the tax increment. That's the total amount of tax revenue for all four taxing authorities that the TID gets to lay claim to. When you're done, that 127 turns into 53,000 for the city. So that's what you're chasing with this one. And by the way, this 125 is the old Aurora Hospital. Looks like it's a decent sized parcel in the middle of a residential area that's now an open field. So you're chasing $53,000 a year starting in 2020 or 2054. Sounds like forever. Um, you're going to, if you look over on the 2025 general obligation promissory note, you're borrowing 600,000 plus. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong column. Hold on. I mean, oh no, sorry. Yes, you're borrowing 670,000 to do some municipal infrastructure work, and that's going to cost you 375,000 in interest. So just like your mortgage, you take out a mortgage and you end up paying a lot more than the face value of your mortgage over time with the interest. Your community is on the hook for $1 million worth of general obligation bonds, and these are in your name. You're responsible for them. Uh, I have not seen the developer agreement to know whether, oh, actually, I did see the developer agreement. The developer has agreed to guarantee $8 million worth of building. So while these promissory notes are in your name and you're on the hook for them, that guarantee means even if they didn't build anything, they have to pay taxes as if they did. So you are likely protected against that. You are definitely protected against the developer walking away from this obligation. The next column, the 1.6 million, that's the tax reimbursement. So on top of the $1 million in principal and interest you're paying to do whatever infrastructure work that covers, you're refunding the developer 1.6 million. And I think it's on the next slide as to what percentage of tax revenue that is. Then always my favorite obnoxious column is the overhead. TIDs are not free. They require some effort and legal help, municipal finance help, in your case, Ellers, and your own staff. They all have work to do. And so they've plugged in an initial 40,000 and then 15,000 a year down to the very bottom for a total of 470,000 over the next bunch of years. The other really important thing to know when you read these things is over on the right-hand side, that liabilities outstanding column is really important. It's only when that thing gets to zero that you can close the TID and let all four taxing authorities start getting the benefit of the construction, or the new tax revenue, I should say. So if you look at this is, if you like baseball, this is called sliding in under the tag. You get to zero in the year 2053. There's no room to maneuver there. So can anything go wrong? Yeah, maybe. Um, you could be wrong about the valuation and the tax increment number could be wrong, which might make it take even longer. There's a whole bunch of any imagine a 25-year project going perfectly according to plan. Like, that's crazy. So has the city done a analysis, a scenario analysis of the things that can go wrong to determine how well or poorly they're protected in case those things go wrong? I have no idea. If they're like any of the other communities that I've bumped into in the state, no, they probably take this at face value and say, looks good, let's do it. I don't see a lot of what I experienced in the workplace as
And
solid
describe that to Donald.
financial analysis and scenario planning and risk management. I worked, by the way, I worked for a bank for 25 years and in technology for 38. And in a large bank, we would never have trusted a 20, almost 28-year plan, taken it at face value. You would obviously do worst case scenario planning and make sure that you're protected against all different possibilities. So again, I'm not saying they haven't done that. I'm not saying they're not protected. I'm just saying it's certainly a decent question to ask. So my observations, one, I think I did read, I hope I'm not wrong on this, that you're giving the land to the developer. So pausing on that for a second, if you remember my comment about price, this is another price. And I think another part of the slippery slope slide, it should be another part of that slippery slope slide. We give tax reimbursements, 68% in your case, bullet 3 here. You're refunding 68% of the tax that they're paying, but you're also giving them the land for free. Not, I don't know how much that land is worth, but it looks pretty decent size and it's in the middle of a residential area. They're going to build $8 million worth of homes on it. It can't be cheap if they were to buy it. I think, I don't know what you guys paid for it, but you're just flat out giving it to them. And I see this all the time. I see it. I see municipalities buying the land. And by the way, the purchase of the land, I don't know that that's in the cost of the TID. That could be just out of your central coffers. Or you may have taken out a separate loan for it. I don't know. But giving the land to the developer, do we really need to do that? Is that okay? But what happens is you've got a supply and demand problem. Everybody's competing against their neighbor town, and price is going to win. That's the way you differentiate yourself, is price. So one of the ways that you can pay the developer is by giving them land that's worth $1 million or $2 million or whatever it is. So the developer is guaranteeing 8 million in construction. That's great. You're giving them 68% of their taxes back every year for the next 20 plus. Since it's only 8 million in construction, it's a minimal impact to your tax levy, which means it's also a minimal impact to your tax bill. But if you're annoyed by giving the land to the developer and you're annoyed by the 68% tax reimbursement, you can just be a teeny bit more annoyed that your taxes will rise 0.17% as well. It doesn't close until 2053, and it doesn't show really any opportunity to close sooner than that. And you've done all that. You've given away all those millions. You've given away the land, which is worth at least $1 million, chasing $52,000 a year in tax revenue for the city after closure starting in 2054. So I don't know what, on the right-hand side, I don't know what the 600,000 in infrastructure covers. Maybe it's important, maybe not. Did anybody do any impact on neighboring home prices? One of the concerns I have about a residential TID in my own area, in my own village, is if you're subsidizing people to build brand new homes and they're using that, they can use that subsidy to do a couple different things. They can make the homes nicer to make sure that they sell at market rates really fast to get them off their books, or they can juice their profits. One or the other, or some of both. So if the developer makes really nice houses because they got all this money of the land and the tax reimbursement, then what does that do to the neighboring home prices? If the new ones are selling at market rate or maybe just a tad higher, is anybody going to buy a house that's 25, 30, 40 years old? It's maybe a little rough around the edges. I don't know. It's probably a question worth asking a realtor that's in the immediate area. Maybe it's not an issue. I don't know. It just seems to me logical that it would put some kind of cap, depending on the number of homes that were being built and the amount of demand. And so speaking of demand, how desperate are you for more homes? Is this something the city is really dying for? Do you really have to have this? Because if I look at the bullets on the left, it would look like you're downright desperate to build new homes. You're giving away the land, you're giving 68% tax reimbursement. And why would you do that if you weren't desperate for homes? Maybe you are. And regarding the property that you own, you can do anything you want with it. Were any alternatives offered? You're spending all that money, you're getting very little in return, and not for a very long time. So, was it really worth it? And did you contemplate any alternatives that might have maybe been a little bit more lucrative? So from there, I will leap to my opinions on your referendum, and I tried my hardest to say why yes and why no, and give equal billing to both. So I'll be full disclosure and say I think kids are abused in the state. I think they're badly abused, but they are the game that everyone plays. So why would you say yes? Because the residents should decide when that amount of future tax revenue is being just given away. It forces transparency for the most part until data centers came along and dropped these big giant TIDs. There was a little bit of rumbling among people in the know, but for the most part they weren't on the front of everybody's newspaper, so to speak. If you go to referendum and say, sorry guys, you have to go to referendum at least for the big ones, that forces transparency. You have to publish all the information. If you want to sell it to the public, get out there, talk about it, tell them why it's good, let the critics give the opposite opinion and sell it to the public. You should have to do that if you're giving away that much revenue. It also challenges the status quo. Like I said, this is a game. This is the game that's being played. And developers, my opinion, developers love it because they have downside protection on profit and they will enjoy this game for as long as it lasts. So for a community to come along and say, we 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 want to say in this about whether we play this game and to what degree. So you just have to ask us when you want to do this because we don't trust you anymore. The solution of a referendum also persists across elections, which is really important. Why would you say no? Well, if you decide to pick up the ball and go home and not play the game anymore, you absolutely are going to discourage developers. There's no question about it. I would turn around and say, how much does that matter to you? Does it matter to you if development drives up a little bit in the short term? Or maybe the available spaces you have in Sheboygan to build on are attractive enough that it doesn't require tax reimbursement and you'll have development anyway, and it'll be immediately available to you as increased tax revenue. It also requires explaining TIDs to voters, which is really hard, as I can attest. It is very, very hard to provide a quick 1-minute elevator pitch on what a TID is and why they should care and why they need to understand them for the upcoming referendum vote. But just because it's hard doesn't mean you should say no, but it is worth considering. Also, in no uncertain terms, TIDs can have two flavors of problems. One can be the design of them, meaning I'm going to give away this amount of money over this many years, and just that whole cash flow page can be riddled with bad decisions. But they can also have execution problems, like the Caledonia TID that I talked about with the abandoned school. That was less of a design problem and more of an execution problem. And so a referendum wouldn't have solved that because I think people would have said, yeah, we really need to do something about that garbage building that people keep getting arrested in for loitering and graffiti and drug dealing. The other reason to say no is you say, well, we want to solve this via election rather than referendum. We need to we need to elect smarter people, people who are more willing to do the work, to understand the math, to not settle for just accepting the expert's opinion and having somebody at the table that represents you and whom you trust to do the math. It's why I ran for trustee, and I'm only a couple months in, but I hope to be performing that function for my village and making sure that we are mature enough to walk away from bad deals and educated enough to negotiate good deals in the first place. But that's my best shot at why yes, why no. I don't have an opinion on what you should do because it really matters what problem you're trying to solve for and how you think is best to solve for your community. And as I said, I have not dug into every single TID because you have a lot of them, which is a red flag, or at least a yellow flag, I should say. Understanding the aggregate impact of them and so on is important. But I end with a bunch of references here, and I'll share this document so the links will work for you. But the best I can offer after that is good luck in making your decision. It is definitely not a no-brainer. And I hope you guys, at a minimum, I hope you get some traction in your community talking about it, because this is definitely, going back to slide one, TIDs have the ability to be a tool and a weapon. And there are an awful lot of places that I see that have turned them into a weapon that is used against the residents to try to solve that tax levy increase problem. So that's all I have, Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we'll open up for some questions. That was really enlightening. So thank you very much, Prescott. One thing that I've read and studied is that the TID percentage that the state of Wisconsin allows is 12%. But the problem is as we continue to develop more, our value goes up. So it's really hard to hit that maximum 12%. But in other states like California, it's something like 5%. So I think that really lends itself well to when you talk about how TIDs are being kind of abused in the state, but that's the game that we play. So I don't know how much you've looked into what other states are doing percentage wise versus Wisconsin.
So I don't have a lot of data on what other states do in terms of caps. I will say it's possible to exceed that cap even without going to the state legislature and asking for a waiver. That one TID in St. Francis that was on my Hall of Shame is actually somewhere in the neighborhood of 30-something%, because they did a trick where they made it really small to start with and then just kept growing it. And the TID is geographically, it's 35% of the town's space. So they just keep adding more projects to it. Now they can't do another TID now that they're over the 12%. And I have asked myself the question, well, what's the right number? Is 12% too much? Is it too low? Is it what? So I don't know. It's a good question. I think because of that disconnect that causes TID construction to drive up your taxes, to me, that's one of the main justifications for the 12% cap. But I wouldn't want my taxes raised 12% because somebody built a building in a TID. So maybe it needs to be lower than that. I don't know. I would love to see the structural problem fixed more than the 12% problem fixed.
Okay, I have one more before I'll turn it over to other people. So I have had conversations in our community with people who have businesses, but also local developers. Alex, I know you're on here. This might be an interesting lead for something at the press. Is local developers are feeling like they're being pushed out of business because they can't compete with these large scale TIDs that are, offered to companies that are friends with our city administrator. And, they feel like they're being pushed out. They can't bid, they can't compete. Have you been seeing that in your area or throughout the state that local developers are being pushed out in favor of specific developers or companies?
Well, clearly the effort to court big developments causes a less of an attention to be paid. I think that the TID subsidy probably also artificially raises the cost of construction. It makes developers less eager to sharpen their pencils on cost of building because the TID provides this easy out for profit guarantee. And yeah, I think it probably does cause some challenge to the developers. I can't quantify it, but it definitely tilts all of the attention and all of the capital and all of the labor towards the big projects, and that causes an unfair playing field for the little guy.
Okay, great, Sandy. I think yours was first. If you can go ahead and put it on there, and then if you're okay with this being recorded, great. Otherwise, I can turn it off and turn it back on for the next one.
You need to come off mute, Sandy.
Yeah, sorry.
My friend Sandy.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm kind of rusty with this. I retired in February, so I don't Zoom as often as I used to. I wanted to just speak a little bit to the 12% because the city of Racine just confronted that. We have 25 active TIDs. We just had to close or retire 2 TIDs that probably should have been retired a long time ago because we wanted to add another 2 TIDs. So because we were at that 12%, we had to retire the 2. Then we had to change the borders of some of what we have neighborhood TIDs in the city of Racine. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but those are where owner-occupied homes can apply for grants to do rehab or enhancements on their homes. So with those 5 neighborhood TIDs we had to eliminate one because of the 12% rule, and then one of the other neighborhood TIDs, we changed the border on that to remove some of the wealthier properties from the TID so that we could achieve that 12%. The other thing that we're doing is we're TID sharing. So one of our neighborhood TIDs that was created to provide grants and infrastructure for that particular TID area now will be funding infrastructure for a development that may be coming in the future where a school used to be. So there's a lot of movement that can take place within the TIDs once they're created that there really is no oversight or really any public representation of the changes that are taking place. So that 12% is really an important mechanism to, at least in some communities, control how many TIDs that you have. And I know Prescott had brought up TID number 9, and that TID will have gone for 35 years when it actually could have been retired more than 20 years ago. Instead, as Prescott said, it's being used as a TID to offer incentives
prop up the other ones.
Exactly. Yep. So I just wanted to add that. So I'll try to take my hand down.
I can do that. Becky, go ahead with your questions. I'm sure it's questions, not question.
It is. I'll do one and then see if other people want to jump in. But Prescott, thank you so much for this. And also thank you for running. That's kind of huge. We need, like you said, more people who are interested in this. It is a lot of reading. It's a lot of number crunching. It requires you to really go to your staff, your, financial staff, and ask questions. And I'll get into a little bit of that later on. And maybe you mentioned this, Prescott, but do you think one of the main issues, because a lot of people are running for re-election right now, is to have the state change the way revenue sharing happens. We're looking at the state sitting on $2 to $4 billion. I don't know the number, their rainy day fund. Should they just be giving it back to us because we know how to spend it the best? Would that help with some of this net new construction angst that everyone is going on about?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think if they gave you more, if they gave every municipality more revenue share next year, those communities would get used to it really fast, and then you'll be right back in the same place chasing levy growth. That levy growth, just think of it as a treadmill. Like every year you need a little bit more to pay for the increased healthcare costs, raises for the staff, new fire trucks, blah blah blah, and a one-time increase of state funds does not solve this problem at all. This problem is a structural problem that's caused by an absolute inability to raise the levy to keep pace with inflation. And there's some danger to letting the inflation increase happen as well, because your community might not need to raise the levy by 5% or 3% or whatever, and they'll do it if you tell them that the minimum is 3. That's the starting point, and then some of them are going to chase construction anyway. But I think having a automatic allowable increase for inflation takes the air out of the balloon a little bit of chasing construction, and we've gone so far in the other direction where we the whole system has fallen so far down that slippery slope that developers won't develop in your community unless you're willing to pay them a ton of money. And they'll tell you that. They'll say, we can't do this without the money. But the cause and effect is backwards. They won't do it without the money because they know they can get the money from some community. Take the damn money out of the system and they'll figure out a different way to build to be profitable, because otherwise they're on an unemployment line, or they're collecting grocery carts at the grocery store. The industry is not going to collapse. I actually had a developer tell me this. The industry will collapse if you take municipal financing out of the system. I said, come on, guys. What do you think? I'm an idiot? You've got the best game in town. You have like minimum 7-8% return on investment if everything goes poorly. It's crazy. But I'm sorry, I'm digressing from your problem, but I don't think more revenue share will solve the problem. I just think it kicks the can down the road for maybe 1 or 2 years.
Well, it hasn't been changed in a long time, so
yeah,
that's why I wondered if there was some recognition that police and fire and recycling and everything that costs more. But can I ask one more follow-up to that, Ashley,
Yeah.
and then I'll shut up for a
Please.
bit if anybody else wants to jump in. Because the other issue we're dealing with here, and this is maybe specifically, this is going to go deep, but is that would it help to have, a better comprehensive plan, which they used to call smart growth planning, right? To sort of have that 5, 10, 20 year, this is why we're doing it. This is the population growth that we are seeing or not seeing. And also tied into that, have better capital planning. If you have better capital planning to redo your buildings, buy the fire trucks, build that into something which I don't feel like we have right now, which also helps your bond rating. Are you seeing some of that as a vulnerability of communities that are getting slammed by some of these TIDs and TIFs?
Well, one, I would say it absolutely is a good idea to have a healthy, comprehensive plan that you've all agreed on that defines the vision for what you want your city to look like. And that doesn't mean you can never make an exception or change something along the way. But what I see communities do, including my own for the last several years, is they set up a comprehensive plan. It's a nice document on the shelf. And as soon as somebody comes in with a request to rezone, they just say, yeah, sure. As long as you're going to build something that we can tax, we're cool with it. Like, you want a data center? Yeah, great. You want a Ferris wheel? Go to town. So it's like there's no comprehensive plan. So that's one thing I'll say. The other thing I will say is one of the side effects of the tax levy increase law is that more and more municipalities are shoving expenses into capital, and the debt levels are going through the roof. So my community, as an example, because by the way, I should clarify, your actual debt payments for the coming year get to be added to the levy no matter what they are. So if your debt payments are going up, your levy can go up. If your debt payments are going down, your levy has to go down. But you get actual debt payments. So that's actually a way to raise your levy, is to shove something into debt. And my community has $100 million in debt, and our annual budget is 20 million. So we're at 5 times because we're not confronting the problem that we have. And we're ending up with, at some point, you can only take on so much debt before all of a sudden your debt gets more expensive, and then you even start hitting state caps.
Just a quick follow-up, and then I'll shut up for a little bit, Ashley. But does the state have any, impetus to kind of crack? I know we talked about 12% being blown past, or are they looking at some of this and saying, wow, Caledonia, that's not good? I mean,
Well,
is there any slap on the wrist for communities that are you're really playing with fire here, or not?
They have a hard cap on the amount of debt that you can take on. That's a percentage of your equalized value, and we're not there yet, but we can start to see it on the horizon at 100 million. I wouldn't want to be that much in debt. I'd like to be in about half as much debt as we are, but it's an escape valve that people have reached for with this levy increase, and
but the
it's
state
not healthy.
Really, like the Department of Administration or anyone, Department of Revenue, isn't really saying we are seeing some predatory actions, happening throughout the state. Okay, thank you, Ashley.
No.
I'll shut up now.
No, I don't have any. No, you're good. Does anybody have any other questions for Prescott? Feel free to turn your mic on or raise your hand.
I have a question,
Awesome.
Ashley.
Great.
Hi, Prescott. I really enjoy this conversation. You talked about that, by looking at the way that these TIFs were set up in our town, that you'd look at it and you'd say that that we are not that we are desperate for new homes. And so my question is like, why would we be acting like we are? And I guess, one thing, what I suspect is that we're trying to cover up our current debt by creating new TIDs and new debt. Is that something that goes on, that it's just kind of a snowball kind of a thing?
The answer to the first part of that question, why are we chasing new home construction? I think you're chasing construction, period, because that's what the calculation says. My favorite little joke is, if you told your city alderpersons that they could raise the levy based on the number of beers that they drank every year, you'd have a lot of drunk aldermen. So if you tell them it's new construction, they could do whatever they can to get new construction. It doesn't matter, like the doghouse, a new roof, I don't care, just build something. So they'll make up excuses why homes are important. You'll hear them say, "Oh, we need new homes because the population is increasing," and then you turn around and read articles how the population's declining, so that's why they're doing it. They're just chasing a number that the city or the state told them they had to chase. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question? I just forgot.
Okay, I was going to say that I'm wondering if we're creating TIDs in order to pay for the debt that we've already assumed.
Probably not. I think because the debt service payments flow naturally into the levy, they're going to be a natural part of your budget every year. The city doesn't have to jockey for them. I think they're just simply trying to raise the general fund part of the levy, the part that they spend on services and salaries and healthcare and so on. The debt will take care of itself. I think the only real impact for the debt is regular expenses, operating expenses. If they can justify putting them in debt, they will, because it prevents them from needing even more construction to raise the levy even higher. And one more thing I'll say, if done right, and you do a TIF or TID that's going to generate some work on infrastructure that is valuable to the city, that's actually a good use of a TID. Like we get two things for the price of one. I think mostly it's desperation. I just want any kind of construction we could get our hands on.
Great. Chris, you raised your hand. Can you go ahead with your question?
I guess one of the things I've always questioned, I thought these tips of kids were supposed to be for blighted areas in our community. And it seems like a couple of the properties have been purchased by the city over the last 6 years. Well, I think it would have been viable properties bought by a developer without setting up.
Hey, Chris, you're breaking up a bit there. I caught the word blighted, but not much more than that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm kind of sitting and doing this remotely because I want to get in on. I had a different meeting I had to step out from. But guess what I'm trying to figure out is why is our community getting abandoned buying property that isn't what I would consider in the private area just to hand over to nothing to a developer.
And I'm still having a hard time
Oh.
making out what you're saying.
So Prescott, he was asking why, and this is a great question, why the city of Sheboygan would be buying up property that's blighted that we would then be giving away to people. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this.
A lot of it
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
blighted though. A lot of it
Yeah,
is
that's
shovel
true.
ready.
Mm-hmm.
So they're buying it from other developers?
I think
or other property owners and then giving it away?
Yeah, I mean, not all
Yeah,
of it,
there's an
but
easy
some of
answer
it.
there.
Yeah.
There's a really easy answer there. So remember, what is price? Price is tax reimbursements and price is giving land away. So they buy it so that they can give it away. It sounds really dumb, but that's why they're doing it, because it's yet another goodie that they can give to a developer to entice them to build. And all they're after is the construction. That's the insidious part of TIDS. That's the part that makes my skin crawl.
Yeah. We're going to move on quickly to two people in the community that are going to talk about something for like 5 to 10 minutes each. Cheryl, I don't know if you're ready, and I'm going to turn the recording off for now, but Cheryl, if you want to go ahead, and Cheryl's going to talk about being priced out of living, right? So she moved up here to escape high bills, and here we are.
Yes.